The year is 1914. Europe, a continent shimmering with palaces and progress, stood on the precipice of an abyss. An intricate network of treaties and alliances, a powder keg of nationalism and imperial ambition, threatened to erupt. The great powers of Europe, puffed up with pride and suspicion, eyed each other across their borders. They rattled their sabers, flexing their military muscle in a dangerous game of brinksmanship. For decades, tensions had been simmering beneath the surface of European diplomacy. Old rivalries festered between nations. A web of secret agreements and shifting alliances set the stage for a conflict of unimaginable scale. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, would be the spark that ignited the inferno. The world watched with bated breath as Europe teetered on the edge of war. Few could have predicted the sheer scale of the carnage that would follow. No one, from the lowliest soldier to the most powerful general, could have imagined the years of brutal conflict that awaited them. This was a world on the brink, a world about to be consumed by the flames of war. Sarajevo, bathed in sunshine, became the epicenter of a seismic event. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were gunned down. Gavrilo Princip, a young Serbian nationalist, became the catalyst for global conflict. Austria-Hungary, outraged, accused Serbia of harboring terrorists. An ultimatum was issued, designed to humiliate Serbia. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. The assassination was a spark that ignited a powder keg. Europe's alliances acted as a deadly chain reaction. Nations were drawn into the conflict, their fates intertwined. The Great War had begun. The system of alliances, meant to prevent war, instead became the very mechanism that dragged Europe into an abyss. These agreements, forged in the name of security and stability, proved to be a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of suspicion and ambition. The Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, was formed in the late 19th century. It was a pact designed to counter the growing power of France and Russia. The Triple Entente, comprised of France, Russia, and Great Britain, emerged in response to the perceived threat of the Triple Alliance. These alliances, initially intended as a deterrent, created a climate of fear and mistrust. Each nation felt obligated to defend its allies, even if it meant going to war over a distant conflict. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, a seemingly localized crisis, quickly escalated into a continental war due to these entangled alliances. Germany, fearing encirclement by its enemies, adopted the Schlieffen Plan, a risky military strategy that involved a rapid invasion of France through neutral Belgium. The plan relied on speed and overwhelming force to knock France out of the war before Russia could fully mobilize. The violation of Belgian neutrality, however, would have dire consequences, drawing Great Britain into the conflict. On August 4, 1914, Great Britain declared war on Germany, officially making the conflict a world war. The summer of 1914 was a time of joyous parades and patriotic fervor. Across Europe, young men, eager to prove their valor, flocked to enlist. They envisioned a short and glorious war, a chance to win honor and glory for their nations. They had no concept of the horrors that awaited them. The initial stages of the war were marked by a sense of naive optimism. Generals on both sides, clinging to outdated tactics, believed that the war would be over by Christmas. They envisioned sweeping cavalry charges and decisive battles that would bring a swift victory. They underestimated the deadly power of modern weaponry and the resolve of their enemies. The German army, following the Schlieffen Plan, stormed through Belgium, their advance marked by brutality and destruction. The Belgian resistance, though valiant, was no match for the German war machine. Cities and towns were reduced to rubble, civilians were terrorized, and a wave of refugees fled the advancing German army. France, determined to defend its soil, met the German onslaught with fierce resistance. The Battle of the Marne, a bloody and chaotic clash, shattered Germany's hopes for a quick victory. The war on the Western Front settled into a deadly stalemate, a brutal war of attrition that would drag on for years. Section 5. Dreams of Glory, Nightmares of War. The early months of the war shattered the illusions of a swift and glorious victory. The romantic notions of valor and heroism were quickly replaced by the grim realities of trench warfare. The Western Front, a snaking line of trenches stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps, became a nightmarish landscape of mud, blood, and barbed wire. Soldiers on both sides found themselves trapped in a claustrophobic hell, living in rat-infested trenches, constantly exposed to the elements and the threat of enemy fire. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the human cost of this brutal conflict. Days were spent in a state of tense boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. Soldiers huddled in their dugouts, seeking refuge from the relentless artillery bombardments. At night, they ventured out into no man's land, the desolate strip of land between the trenches, to repair wire, gather intelligence, or launch raids on enemy positions. Life in the trenches was a dehumanizing experience, a relentless test of physical and mental endurance. Soldiers witnessed horrors that would scar their souls for a lifetime. They saw their friends and comrades cut down by machine gun fire, blown to pieces by artillery shells, or slowly succumbing to their wounds in the mud. Section 6. A New Kind of War. World War I was a conflict unlike any other, a brutal clash of empires. Technological advancements made war more horrific. Machine guns, artillery, and poison gas transformed the battlefield. Poison gas choked the life out of soldiers. These advancements led to stalemate and attrition. Armies were locked in a deadly embrace. The world watched in horror as casualties mounted. Section 1. The Empires at War. By the end of 1914, the initial shock of war had given way to a grim reality. Europe was locked in a deadly embrace, a struggle for survival between empires. On one side stood the Central Powers Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. On the other side, the Allied powers, Great Britain, France, Russia, and their growing list of allies. Each nation brought its own strengths and weaknesses to the conflict. Germany, with its powerful industrial base and well-trained army, posed a formidable threat. Austria-Hungary, a sprawling empire of diverse ethnicities, was plagued by internal divisions but still commanded a sizable army. The Ottoman Empire, once a mighty power, was a shadow of its former self, but controlled strategically vital territory. The Allied powers, though initially on the back foot, possessed their own advantages. Great Britain, with its global empire and powerful navy, controlled the seas. France, bloodied but unbowed, was determined to defend its homeland. Russia, though slow to mobilize, possessed a vast reserve of manpower. The war was not just a clash of armies, it was a clash of ideologies, a struggle between competing visions of the future. The Central Powers, led by Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II, represented an old order, a world dominated by empires and autocratic rule. The Allied powers, at least in their own minds, represented a more liberal world order, a world based on democracy and self-determination. As the war dragged on, these ideological differences would become increasingly pronounced, fueling the propaganda machines on both sides and hardening the resolve of the combatants. Section 2. The Eastern Front explodes. While the Western Front devolved into a bloody stalemate, the Eastern Front was a theater of vast distances and sweeping maneuvers. Here, the Russian army, though poorly equipped and led, clashed with the forces of Germany and Austria-Hungary in a series of brutal battles. The Russians, driven by a fervent patriotism and a desire to defend their Slavic brethren in Serbia, launched a series of offensives into East Prussia and Galicia. Initially, they achieved some success, but their lack of modern weaponry and logistical support proved to be their undoing. The Germans, led by Generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, inflicted a series of crushing defeats on the Russians at the battles of Tannenberg and Masurian Lakes. These victories, though costly, crippled the Russian army and sent shockwaves through the Allied ranks. Despite these setbacks, the Russians continued to fight with dogged determination. Their vast numbers and willingness to absorb staggering losses meant that they could not be easily defeated. The Eastern Front became a meat grinder, consuming millions of lives in a seemingly endless cycle of offensives and counteroffensives. The sheer scale of the fighting on the Eastern Front, combined with the brutality of the conflict, would have a profound impact on the course of the war and the fate of Russia itself. Section 3. A global conflict ignites. World War I, despite its name, was not confined to the battlefields of Europe. The conflict quickly spread to other continents, drawing in colonies and dominions from across the globe. From the deserts of Africa to the jungles of Asia, men from every corner of the British Empire answered the call to arms. Indian soldiers, renowned for their bravery and discipline, fought with distinction on the Western Front, in Mesopotamia, and in East Africa. Canadian troops, who would earn a reputation as fierce shock troops, played a pivotal role in the battles of Ypres and the Somme. Australian and New Zealand forces, known as Anzacs, gained lasting fame for their courage and sacrifice at Gallipoli. The involvement of these colonial troops had a profound impact on the war effort. Their manpower helped to sustain the Allied armies during some of the darkest days of the conflict. However, their participation also highlighted the global nature of the war and the complex relationship between European empires and their colonial subjects. The war would have a lasting impact on these colonies, fueling nationalist movements and contributing to the eventual dismantling of the European empires. Section 4. The Ottoman Front and the Gallipoli disaster. In 1915, the war expanded to the Ottoman Empire, ruled by the Ottoman Turks. The British launched a naval attack on the Dardanelles Straits. The attack proved to be a costly failure. Ottoman defenses, bolstered by German advisors, inflicted heavy losses. The Allies then launched a land invasion of Gallipoli. The Gallipoli campaign became a disastrous military operation. Allied troops faced fierce resistance and heavy fire. The campaign bogged down into a bloody stalemate. The Gallipoli campaign was a costly failure for the Allies. For the Ottoman Empire, it was a much-needed victory. The campaign had a lasting impact on Australia and New Zealand. As the war entered its second year, a sense of disillusionment and despair began to settle over the battlefields of Europe. The initial optimism had long since evaporated, replaced by a grim determination to see the conflict through to its bitter end. The fog of war, a metaphorical haze of confusion, fear, and uncertainty, descended upon the trenches, obscuring the lines between right and wrong, victory and defeat. Soldiers on both sides, trapped in a nightmarish world of mud, blood, and barbed wire, struggled to make sense of the carnage that surrounded them. Communication between the front lines and the high commands was often unreliable, leading to misunderstandings, delays, and fatal errors in judgment. Propaganda, disseminated through newspapers, posters, and newsreels, painted a distorted picture of the war, fueling hatred and suspicion on both sides. The fog of war extended beyond the trenches, seeping into the homes and hearts of civilians across Europe. Families, separated by war, clung to hope while grappling with the loss of loved ones and the constant threat of enemy attack. Governments, desperate for victory, resorted to increasingly authoritarian measures, suppressing dissent and mobilizing their economies for total war. The world, once familiar and predictable, had been irrevocably transformed by the horrors of war. The old order was crumbling, and in its place emerged a new era of violence, uncertainty, and global conflict. In February 1916, the German army launched a massive offensive on the Western Front. Their target was Verdun, a city of strategic and symbolic importance for the French. The plan was to bleed the French army white in a war of attrition. The Battle of Verdun became a symbol of French resilience and the horrors of modern warfare. The Germans pounded the French defenses relentlessly. The French fought with ferocious determination. Verdun became known as the Devil's Anvil, a place of unimaginable suffering and sacrifice. Just as the Battle of Verdun was reaching its climax, the British launched their own offensive on the Somme River. The Battle of the Somme, which began on July 1, 1916, would become one of the bloodiest battles in human history. When the British soldiers went over the top, they were met by a storm of machine gun fire. The first day was a disaster, with nearly 60,000 British casualties. The battle claimed over 1 million lives and symbolized the futility of trench warfare. Despite the horrors of Verdun and the Somme, the tide of the war was slowly beginning to turn in favor of the Allies. The United States, outraged by German submarine warfare and the Zimmermann Telegram, a secret diplomatic cable that proposed a German-Mexican alliance against the United States, declared war on Germany in April 1917. The entry of the United States into the war, though not immediately decisive, provided a much-needed boost to Allied morale and resources. The American Expeditionary Force, led by General John J. Pershing, began arriving in France in large numbers in 1918, bringing with them fresh troops, supplies, and a determination to see the war through to victory. On the Eastern Front, the Russian Revolution of 1917 led to the collapse of the Tsarist regime and the rise of the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks, eager to consolidate their power and end Russia's involvement in the war, signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918. The treaty, which ceded vast swaths of Russian territory to Germany, was a humiliating blow to the Allies. However, it also freed up German troops for deployment on the Western Front, where they hoped to achieve a decisive victory before the full weight of American military might could be brought to bear. The year 1918 dawned with a sense of desperate urgency on both sides of the Western Front. The Germans, their resources dwindling, knew they had to achieve a decisive victory before the United States could fully deploy its forces. The Allies, battered but not broken, prepared for a renewed German onslaught. German General Erich Ludendorff devised a series of massive offensives aimed at breaking the Allied lines. These spring offensives were a last desperate gamble to win the war. In March 1918, the Germans unleashed their fury on the Somme. The British, caught off guard, were forced to retreat. The Germans achieved significant territorial gains, but at a high price. Their casualties were heavy, and their advance slowed by logistical problems and stiffening Allied resistance. Undeterred by their mounting losses, the Germans pressed their offensive, launching a second attack on the Lys River in April 1918. This time, their target was the British Expeditionary Force, commanded by Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig. The Germans hoped to drive the British into the sea, dealing a fatal blow to Allied morale and knocking Great Britain out of the war. The German attack, spearheaded by a massive artillery bombardment, caught the British by surprise. The British, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with characteristic tenacity, but they were gradually forced to give ground. The Germans advanced rapidly, capturing the strategically important city of Kemmel and threatening the vital Channel ports. Haig, facing disaster, issued his famous "backs to the wall" order, urging his troops to fight to the death. "Every position must be held to the last man," Haig declared. "There must be no retirement. With our backs to the wall and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end." The British, inspired by Haig's words and the arrival of fresh troops from other sectors of the front, rallied and launched a series of desperate counterattacks. The German advance was slowed, then halted. The German offensive, though it had come dangerously close to achieving its objective, had ultimately failed. The British Army, though battered and bruised, had survived. Section 3. The tide turns. Allied counteroffensives. The German spring offensives, though they had initially achieved significant gains, had come at a high price. The German army, exhausted and depleted, had shot its bolt. The Allies, bolstered by the arrival of American troops, were finally ready to seize the initiative. In July 1918, the French, led by the tenacious General Ferdinand Foch, launched a counteroffensive at the Second Battle of the Marne. The French, supported by American and British troops, attacked with a fury that surprised the Germans. The German lines, already stretched thin, crumbled under the onslaught. The Second Battle of the Marne marked a turning point in the war. The German army, once seemingly invincible, was now in retreat. The Allies, sensing victory, launched a series of coordinated offensives all along the Western Front. The British, with their Canadian and Australian allies, attacked at Amiens, smashing through the German lines and inflicting heavy casualties. The